The stormfront over Khelar Station was not made of water or wind. It was metal and plasma, shards of burning vessels tumbling through the upper atmosphere like dying meteors. Each streak of fire marked a ship that had once been part of the Terran fleet, a proud, defiant armada that had come to reclaim what was theirs and now descended in ruin. From the observation deck of the command spire, Marshal Rynard Vale watched the chaos unfold with unblinking eyes. The glass before him trembled with distant detonations, the sky split open in ripples of blue radiation. "Signal from the dreadship Courage Unending," said a voice from behind him. The officer's tone was clipped, taut with strain. "They are requesting permission to begin atmospheric descent. Their reactors are failing." Vale turned slowly, his long coat brushing the floor like a shadow. "Tell them to burn everything they have left before they fall. The enemy must not reach this station while we still draw breath." The officer saluted and hurried away, boots echoing against the steel floor. Vale returned his gaze to the glass. The enemy vessels, sleek crescents of black alloy and humming light, moved through the upper clouds with the precision of blades sliding through flesh. The Vehlan Coalition had pursued humanity across 3 systems already, forcing retreat after retreat. And now, here on the windswept moon of Khelar, the Terrans made their final stand. The humans had named the Vehlans angels once, in the first days of contact, before they understood the cruelty beneath the serene faces and the song-like speech. Their pale skin reflected starlight, their eyes glowed like shards of a dying sun. They spoke of unity and order while dismantling entire species, reducing civilizations to ornamental servitude. But humans had never been good servants. Vale's reflection in the glass showed a man in his 50s, face lined by years of exhaustion and unhealed loss. His hair, once black, had turned to silver strands around the temples, and his left eye had been replaced with a steel-gray implant that hummed faintly when he frowned. He had commanded fleets, lost planets, and buried more soldiers than he could count. And yet every defeat had only sharpened him. Humans were strange that way, bent but never broken. Behind him, the deck lights flickered as another energy surge rippled through the power grid. The air smelled faintly of ozone and machine oil. A low rumble built beneath the floor, the resonance of the defense cannons recharging. Vale spoke softly to the empty room. "Let them come." The Vehlans did. The first wave struck the outer defense ring in a bloom of green light, disintegrating the orbital mines. The second wave followed in tight formation, curving around the station's magnetic shields. Khelar's automated guns roared in response, flinging tungsten shells at near-light speed. The night turned to a strobe of fire and lightning. Within the command spire, the control crews worked in silence. Every human there knew the cost of failure. A voice crackled over the comms. "Marshal Vale, this is Commander Lion of the Courage Unending. We have fired the last of our missiles. The Vehlan carrier has been disabled, but our engines are gone. We are falling." Vale closed his eyes briefly. "Understood, Commander. You have done your duty." "Permission to impact the surface deliberately, sir. I can take at least 1 cruiser with us." "Granted," Vale said. His throat felt tight, but his voice did not waver. "Make it count." The channel cut off. Moments later, a new sun blossomed above the horizon as the Courage Unending plunged into the Vehlan formation, detonating its antimatter core. The shockwave rolled across the clouds, scattering the enemy fleet for a heartbeat. Vale seized that heartbeat. "Fire sequence Delta," he ordered. "Target the fractured formations." The command deck exploded into motion. Cannons roared again, guided by the precision of human instincts and old-fashioned stubbornness. The station's massive coil arrays unleashed arcs of blue fire that tore through Vehlan hulls like lightning through glass. For the first time that night, the enemy faltered. Vale watched the tactical screen, a storm of icons flickering red and white. "Push them," he muttered. "Show them what we are." From deep within Khelar's core, human ingenuity answered his call. The planetary defense network, a labyrinth of underground railguns and plasma arrays, woke from its long slumber. Bursts of energy erupted from the moon's surface, tracing brilliant scars across the blackness of space. In the chaos, one of the enemy cruisers broke formation and plunged toward the surface. Vale's eyes tracked it automatically. "They are deploying ground forces," he said. "Prepare the eastern bastion, all remaining Marines to fall back line 3. He turned to the nearest officer. "Signal Colonel Terran, I want the bastion held until the last drop of blood." The officer hesitated. "Marshal, that bastion is already overrun." Vale's jaw tightened. "Then we reclaim it." The officer hesitated only a moment longer before nodding and hurrying away. Outside, the Vehlan cruiser sliced into the atmosphere, its hull wreathed in flames. Moments later, it struck the surface in a bloom of dust and fire. Vale knew what would emerge from the wreckage, those tall, gleaming figures with their crystalline rifles and flawless discipline. The Vehlans always fought as if the universe owed them victory. Humans, however, fought as if they owed the universe a debt of defiance. Vale made his way to the lower levels of the spire, accompanied by a handful of guards. The elevator shuddered as it descended, passing through layers of armor and reinforced corridors. When the doors opened, the scent of sweat and iron filled the air. Soldiers moved through the corridors, faces grim but determined. He walked among them silently, returning salutes, stopping occasionally to clasp a hand or share a word. He saw exhaustion, yes, but also something deeper, something the Vehlans had never understood, hope born of fury. The humans of Khelar were not the elite of Earth's surviving forces. They were miners, engineers, conscripts, and refugees, yet they fought harder than any trained legion. They had nowhere else to go. Vale reached the armory, where Colonel Terran waited, a massive woman with scars tracing down her neck like lightning. "Marshal," she said, "we're running low on shells for the railguns. The last shipment never made it past the blockade." "Then we use the scrap," Vale replied. "Anything dense enough to punch through their armor." Metal debris, ship plating, melt it down and forge it. Terran grinned fiercely. "We already started. The forges are running hot." "Good." He paused, looking at her. "You know what's coming." "I do," she said simply. "We'll hold the line." He clasped her shoulder once hard. "See that you do." Minutes later, the alarms began again. The Vehlans had breached the outer perimeter. The ground shook with the thunder of their landing craft. Vale took his rifle, a heavy, old-pattern weapon scarred from years of battle, and joined the march toward the eastern bastion. The tunnel opened into the night, and the world beyond was fire. The Vehlan landing zones glowed with emerald light, their soldiers advancing in precise formation. Human artillery rained down upon them, but they advanced undeterred, shimmering shields absorbing the blasts. Vale took position behind a shattered barricade. "All batteries, fire on my mark." The first Vehlan column reached the ridge. Vale's mark was a single word. "Now," the world erupted. Mines, shells, and energy bolts converged into a storm of destruction. The front line dissolved into chaos. For every human that fell, another rose. For every meter lost, 2 were reclaimed in blood. Hours passed, though no one counted them. The night stretched into eternity. At last, the eastern bastion's guns fell silent. Smoke drifted across the battlefield. Vale stood amid the wreckage, body aching, armor scorched. Around him, survivors tended to the wounded or scavenged weapons. A flicker of movement drew his gaze. From the haze, a Vehlan emerged, tall, silver-eyed, armor gleaming even under the soot of war. It raised its rifle slowly, deliberately. Vale's weapon was empty. He met the alien's gaze and waited. The Vehlan hesitated. "Why do you persist?" it asked, voice melodic yet cold. "Your species is broken. Your worlds burn. Surrender, and you may yet be allowed to live." Vale's lips curved into a tired smile. "Because you mistake survival for life." He lunged forward. The Vehlan fired, the blast grazing his side, but Vale slammed into it with all his weight. They crashed to the ground, the alien's rifles skittering away. Vale drew his combat knife and drove it upward beneath the Vehlan's throat guard. The blade met resistance, then slid through. The alien's eyes widened in shock before the light faded from them. Vale staggered to his feet, chest heaving. Around him, the battle had quieted temporarily. The humans had held the bastion, for now. Darren appeared at his side, her armor smeared with ash and blood. "They're pulling back," she said. "Regrouping, maybe." Vale nodded slowly. "They will come again, and we'll meet them again." He looked up at the sky, where the shattered remnants of the fleet still burned like dying stars. "As long as one of us stands," he said quietly, "humanity stands." The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. Every soldier nearby heard them and straightened just a little taller. Because on this distant, desolate moon, beneath a sky of ruin and fire, the last spark of humanity refused to die. The morning after the siege was a pale, bruised thing. The horizon of Khelar's ash-grey plains was lit by the dim sun, a disk of weak amber fire. The air was thick with the scent of scorched metal and burned ozone. The human defenders moved through the ruins of the eastern bastion like ghosts, collecting ammunition, hauling the wounded, and counting the dead. Marshal Rynard Vale stood beside a shattered barricade of fused stone and steel, surveying the aftermath. The ground was littered with fragments of Vehlan armor and the blackened remains of drones. He could still see faint traces of where the Vehlans had stood, their footprints burned into the soil by the heat of their armor. Colonel Darren approached, helmet under one arm. "We've cleared the last of their scouts," she said. "No sign of another wave yet." "They're regrouping," Vale said quietly. "They always do." Darren nodded grimly. "Our communications relays are gone. We are blind beyond the inner valley." Vale turned toward the distant spire that jutted from the landscape, the heart of Khelar Station, still standing despite the orbital bombardments. The defense grid had survived the night, but only barely. The next assault would find it weaker. "How many did we lose?" he asked. 700 confirmed, Darren said. "Another 100 missing." Vale's hands tightened behind his back. "And the fleet?" she hesitated. "No new transmissions. I think we're the last, Marshal." He closed his eyes. For a moment he heard the echoes of his past, the laughter of comrades long gone, the roar of the Terran fleet when it still blazed across the stars with hope rather than desperation. Now only Khelar remained, a dying ember at the edge of the galaxy. But embers could still burn. Vale opened his eyes. "Get the engineers moving. We'll rebuild the defenses. I want new trenches dug by nightfall and every remaining gun repaired." Darren nodded. "And the wounded? Get them underground," Vale said. "They'll be safer in the forges, and make sure they know they're not forgotten." She saluted and left him to the wind and silence. For a long while, Vale stood alone amid the ruins. The sky above was streaked with distant contrails, Vehlan ships shifting position in orbit. They had not withdrawn, only paused. Perhaps they were waiting for reinforcements, or perhaps they were simply savoring the inevitable victory. Vale spat into the dust. "You will choke on that victory," he whispered. He turned and began the long walk back toward the spire. Khelar Station had once been a mining complex, carved into the moon's crust centuries earlier when humanity first reached the outer systems. Its tunnels ran for kilometers beneath the surface, a labyrinth of caverns reinforced by steel and stubbornness. When the war began, it had been converted into a fortress. Now it was a tomb waiting to be sealed. Vale descended into the lower levels, the corridors humming with generators and the rhythmic clang of hammers. The air grew hotter, filled with the metallic tang of molten alloy. In the heart of the forge chambers, engineers worked beside glowing furnaces, casting makeshift ammunition from scavenged wreckage. One of them, a young woman with oil streaked across her face, looked up as he entered. "Marshal," she said, straightening instinctively, "we've started melting the outer hull of the crashed Vehlan craft. Their alloy is tough, but it holds shape well enough for shells." Vale nodded approvingly. "Good. Adaptation is survival." The woman grinned faintly. "That's what my father used to say. He was on the first colony ship that came out here. And now his daughter forges weapons to save it," Vale said. "Your father would be proud." She paused, then looked back to her work, her hands steady despite the tremor in her voice. "Let's make sure there's still a world to be proud of." Vale left her to her task. As he walked deeper into the tunnels, he passed makeshift hospitals, rows of cots and medics working tirelessly amid the dim glow of biolamps. The wounded lay wrapped in bandages, their bodies marked by burns and shrapnel, yet there were no cries of despair, only the low murmur of endurance. Humanity had learned to bear pain without breaking. At the far end of the chamber, a child sat beside a stretcher, holding the hand of a motionless figure. The child could not have been older than 10, their face smudged with soot, eyes wide but dry. Vale slowed as he passed, his chest tightening. The figure on the stretcher wore the insignia of a miner, likely the child's parent. Vale hesitated, then knelt beside the child. "What is your name?" he asked softly. "Raylan," the child said. "My mother said we'd leave for the core world soon, but the ships never came." Vale looked at the still form on the stretcher, then back to the child. "Your mother was brave. She said the same about you," Raylan said quietly. "She said you never stopped fighting." Vale's voice caught. Neither did she. He stood slowly and placed a hand on the child's shoulder. "Stay strong, Raylan. The stars favor the stubborn." He left before the grief in his chest could find voice. Later that day, Vale convened his officers in the command hall. The great map table flickered with static, its projection of the battlefield distorted by interference. Colonel Darren stood to his right. Beside her were two other officers, Captain Merrick, in charge of the artillery batteries, and Lieutenant Solon, a wiry man with the haunted eyes of one who had survived too many retreats. Vale gestured to the projection. "The Vehlans have shifted their fleet to high orbit. They're conserving resources for a final strike. We have perhaps 2 days before they descend again." Merrick frowned. 2 days won't be enough to rebuild the bastion. "Then we hold with what we have," Vale said, "and we make them bleed for every meter." Solon spoke up quietly. "There is another option, sir. We could evacuate the civilians through the mining tunnels. The old shafts lead to the northern ridge. If we clear the debris, we might be able to launch escape pods from there." Vale looked at him for a long moment. "And where would they go, Lieutenant? The Vehlans control the skies. The fleet is gone. The nearest human settlement is light years away." "Then we send them anyway," Solon said, defiance flickering in his eyes. "Even if only a few get through." Vale's gaze softened slightly. "You remind me of myself once, Lieutenant." Solon's jaw tightened. "Then you know what it means not to give up." "I do," Vale said quietly, "and that's why I won't waste lives on hope that cannot reach the stars. Every hand we have must stay here, every soul must fight." The silence that followed was heavy. At last, Darren spoke. "He's right. If we scatter, we die alone. If we stand, we die together." "I'd rather die with a rifle in my hands." Vale nodded. "Then it's settled. 2 days. We rebuild, rearm, and prepare for the end." He looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes. "We've been running for too long. From our worlds, our failures, our ghosts. No more. Here we stop running." The officers saluted in unison. For a moment, the weariness in their faces faded, replaced by grim purpose. That night, as the second sun dipped below the horizon, Vale climbed to the surface once more. The battlefield stretched before him, littered with the remains of both armies. He could see the faint glimmer of Vehlan ships in the upper atmosphere, watching like vultures. A faint crunch of boots behind him made him turn. It was Darren. She handed him a flask of recycled water. "Thought you might need it," she said. "Thank you," he said, taking a sip. The water tasted faintly of metal but was cool on his tongue. She looked at him in the dim light. "You ever think about Earth?" Vale was silent for a long moment. "Every day," he said at last. "I remember the rain most of all. The smell of wet soil, the sound against the rooftops. It was ordinary, beautifully ordinary." Darren smiled faintly. "I was born on a station, never saw a sky until I joined the service. Always wondered what rain felt like." "Cold," Vale said, "but alive." They stood in silence, watching the distant flashes of Vehlan engines. "Do you think we'll win?" she asked finally. Vale's answer came without hesitation. "We will make them remember us. That's victory enough." Darren nodded. "Then we'll make them remember." The next morning, a low tremor shook the ground. The alarms flared across the station. Vale was already in motion before the first siren finished sounding. Reports streamed in through the comms. multiple Vehlan landers descending from orbit, deploying armored walkers and infantry. The final assault had begun. Vale reached the surface command post and scanned the horizon. The sky burned with streaks of emerald light. Dozens of Vehlan craft pierced the clouds, their hulls gleaming with the cold perfection of machines made for war. "All batteries," he shouted, "target the landing zones, fire everything we have." The ground shook as railguns and plasma cannons unleashed their fury. The air filled with the thunder of explosions. Vehlan drop craft shattered mid-descent, raining molten debris, but many more broke through, slamming into the planes with seismic force. From their bellies emerged the Vehlans, ranks of towering figures, moving in perfect unison. Their energy shields shimmered like liquid glass. Behind them, massive war engines advanced, each step sending ripples through the ground. Vale's voice carried over the comms. "All units, defensive lines Alpha through Delta, hold positions, do not retreat." He watched as the first human lines met the enemy. The world dissolved into fire and sound. The Vehlans advanced relentlessly, their weapons cutting through barricades and bodies alike. But the humans fought with ferocity born of desperation. Mines detonated beneath Vehlan feet, flamethrowers roared, snipers picked targets with cold precision. At the center of it all, Vale moved among his soldiers, rifle blazing, his voice cutting through the chaos like a beacon. Wherever he went, morale surged. Wherever he fell back, the line bent but did not break. Hours blurred together. By the time the sun began to set, the battlefield was a graveyard of metal and flesh. The Vehlans had pushed the humans back to the spire itself, but their ranks had thinned. Their perfect formations were marred by the cost of every step. Vale stood on the last barricade, his armor cracked, his weapon overheated. He looked at the approaching tide and smiled grimly. A message came through the comms, Darren's voice, breathless but steady. "Marshal, the forges are ready. We've converted the reactors into overload charges. We can detonate the core." Vale's gaze hardened. "That would take the entire station." "Yes," Darren said, "and everything within 50 kilometers." He looked at the advancing Vehlans, their silver ranks glinting in the dying light. "Then we make it count." He pressed the comm. "Begin the sequence. I'll hold them here." Darren's voice broke slightly. "Rynard, do it." A pause, then, "Yes, Marshal." Vale turned to his soldiers. "Fall back to the tunnels, that's an order." They hesitated, unwilling to leave him. "Go," he shouted. Reluctantly, they obeyed. Vale stood alone atop the barricade as the Vehlans closed in. Their leader, a tall figure with a crystalline crown and a staff of pulsing light, stepped forward. "Your resistance is meaningless," it said, voice calm, almost pitying. "You cannot kill what is infinite." Vale raised his rifle. "Neither can you." The Vehlan tilted its head. "You would destroy yourself to deny us victory." "Not destroy," Vale said. "Define." He looked up at the sky, where the remnants of human ships still burned like embers. "You came to teach us submission, but you will leave knowing defiance." The Vehlan leader opened its mouth to reply, but the ground beneath them began to tremble. Deep within Khelar's heart, the reactors reached critical mass. The air vibrated with rising energy. Vale's last words were a whisper to the stars. For humanity, the world erupted in white light. When the shockwave faded, there was nothing left of Khelar's surface but glass and dust. The Vehlan fleet withdrew from orbit, their sensors unable to find life amid the ruins. But deep beneath the surface, in the collapsed tunnels of the northern ridge, a handful of survivors stirred amid the debris: miners, soldiers, engineers, and one small child named Raylan. They looked up toward the cracked ceiling, where faint light filtered through. And even there, in that buried darkness, the fire of humanity still burned. When the survivors finally clawed their way to the surface, the world above was unrecognizable. The plains of Khelar were now a glassed wasteland, fractured into ridges of obsidian and pools of molten slag. The once towering spire of the station had been reduced to a jagged stump jutting from the ground like a black tooth. The air shimmered with residual radiation and heat, and the sky was a dull, smoky red. Colonel Darren led the survivors through the wreckage. Her armor was cracked, her face streaked with grime, but her eyes burned with grim resolve. Behind her trudged the remnants of humanity's last defenders, barely 50 souls, many wounded, none unbroken. Among them were miners, engineers, soldiers, and a handful of children who had outlived the war. At the rear of the group walked Raylan, clutching a scavenged rifle nearly as long as their arm. The child's expression was hollow, but their steps were steady. "Keep moving," Darren said, her voice roughened by smoke and exhaustion. "We need to find shelter before the next storm hits." The storms of Khelar were no longer made of dust or ice. After the detonation of the reactors, the moon's fragile atmosphere had been poisoned by metallic debris. Each storm carried flakes of conductive ash sharp enough to strip flesh from bone. The survivors marched toward the northern ridges, where the mining tunnels still opened into the rock face. Those tunnels had once been an escape route. Now they would become their grave, unless they found a way to rebuild. Darren paused at the crest of a rise and looked back. The glassed crater that had been the heart of Khelar Station still glowed faintly, a wound in the world. Somewhere beneath that glow, Rynard Vale's bones were dust, his name already turning into legend. She clenched her jaw. "You bought us this chance," she murmured. "Now we'll make it mean something." The tunnels were colder than the surface, but safe. The group sealed the entrances with scrap metal and rubble rigging motion sensors salvaged from wrecked drones. Inside, they lit lamps and set up a rough camp. An engineer named Fenric took stock of supplies, a few crates of rations, medical kits, portable reactors with limited charge, and one water purifier half-melted from the explosion. "It's not enough," Fenric said bluntly. "We'll last a few weeks at most, unless we find more sources." "We'll last longer," Darren said. "We have to." Fenric gave her a look that was equal parts respect and disbelief. "You sound like Vale." Darren's lips twitched. Good, he was right about most things. They worked through the night. The miners reinforced the cavern walls. The engineers restored power to old lights and machinery. The wounded rested in the deeper tunnels where the air was cooler. Raylan and 2 other children helped carry scrap metal, too small to fight, but determined to contribute. As the hours passed, Darren found herself walking the perimeter, unable to sleep. She moved through the dim corridors, listening to the hum of generators and the faint echoes of voices. Every sound felt fragile, temporary. When she reached the farthest chamber, she stopped. A section of the wall had collapsed, revealing a narrow shaft descending into darkness. The edges were lined with ancient support beams, half-rusted but intact. Darren knelt, shining her lamp downward. The shaft seemed endless. "Colonel," a voice asked behind her. She turned to see Raylan, the child's small face illuminated by the flickering light. "You should be resting," Darren said. "I could not sleep," Raylan replied. "It is too quiet." Darren understood. After so many nights of war, silence felt like a trap. "Come," she said gently, "stay near me." Raylan peered into the shaft. "What is down there?" "Old tunnels, maybe," Darren said. "Before the station was built, this moon was mined for deep-core metals. There might still be machines or caches left." "Or something worse," Raylan murmured. Darren smiled faintly. "Then we'll face it." By morning, the survivors gathered to discuss their next move. Fenric spread a rough map across a crate. "We have 2 options," he said. "Stay here and wait for rescue that may never come, or go deeper and look for the old mining vaults. They could contain energy cells, air recyclers, maybe even weapons." "Going deeper could also kill us," said a miner named Arath. His arm was wrapped in a makeshift sling. "There's seismic instability in the lower tunnels. Half of them collapsed during the reactor blast." Darren's gaze swept over the group. "If we stay, we starve. If we move, we might find a way off this rock. I'll take those odds." Raylan spoke up quietly. Marshal Vale would have gone deeper. The others fell silent. For a moment, the child's words carried the weight of command. Darren nodded slowly. "Then that's what we'll do. Prepare gear and rations. We move at first light." They descended into the shaft in teams of 3, using old mining harnesses and ropes. The air grew colder the deeper they went, the light dimmer. At last, the shaft opened into a massive cavern. The walls glistened with veins of strange, iridescent ore that pulsed faintly as if alive. The floor was littered with ancient mining machines, hulking constructs of rusted steel and broken glass. Fenric approached one of the machines, brushing off dust. "These are centuries old," he said, awe in his voice. "But look, the cores are intact. If we can restore power," Darren nodded, "do it. Whatever energy they still have, we'll use." As they worked, Raylan wandered toward the far end of the cavern, drawn by a faint glow. The light emanated from a sealed bulkhead door, half buried under rockfall. Strange symbols were etched into its surface, unfamiliar even to human eyes. "Colonel," Raylan called, "I found something." Darren approached, her rifle raised. "That is not Terran," she said, studying the markings. "Fenric, get over here." The engineer joined them, frowning. "These symbols, they match the Vehlan patterns we saw on their ships, but this structure predates their arrival. That makes no sense." "Unless they were here first," Darren said. A chill passed through the group. Raylan traced a hand over the symbols. "It feels warm." "Step back," Darren said sharply. The child obeyed. Fenric knelt beside the panel, examining the seams. "There's power behind it, a residual field, faint but stable. Can you open it?" "Maybe," Fenric said, "but we should be careful. Whatever S in there might not like visitors." Darren hesitated. Every instinct told her to seal the tunnel and leave, but curiosity, that stubborn human trait, burned stronger than fear. "Do it," she said. Fenric connected a power cell to the door's interface. Sparks flickered. The symbols glowed brighter, pulsing in rhythmic patterns. Then, with a deep metallic groan, the bulkhead split open. Beyond lay a chamber unlike anything human hands had built. The walls were smooth and silver, curving in organic shapes. At the center floated a massive crystal, suspended in midair by invisible force. Faint energy currents rippled through it, casting shimmering reflections across the chamber. Fenric stared in awe. "This is Vehlan technology, but older, different." Darren stepped closer, her boots echoing softly. "What is it? A memory vault, perhaps," Fenric said, "or an energy core. The Vehlans are known to store their consciousness patterns in crystalline matrices. Maybe this is one of them." Raylan approached cautiously. "Is it alive?" The crystal pulsed once, faintly, as if answering. Darren raised her weapon. "Step back." But before she could react further, the air around the crystal shimmered, and a projection appeared. It was a figure, tall and slender, with features too perfect to be human. Its skin was pale silver, its eyes burning with inner light. "Who disturbs the archive of the architects?" the apparition asked, voice echoing in every direction. The humans froze. Darren lowered her rifle slightly. "We are survivors of Khelar, humans. The war you began has ended, at least here. We found your vault." The figure tilted its head. "Humans, yes, I remember your kind, the defiant flame, the unyielding pain." Fenric stepped forward. "You're Vehlan?" "No," the figure said. "I am older. The Vehlans were our children." The words hung in the air like thunder. Darren frowned. "Children?" The apparition nodded. "Long ago we seeded this system with life. The Vehlans were made to preserve what we created, but they chose dominion instead. They forgot their purpose, and so the fire we once lit in them burned to ash." Raylan spoke quietly. "Then you made a mistake." The figure's gaze shifted to the child. "Perhaps, yet mistakes are how creation learns." Darren's voice was sharp. "If you truly made them, then you are responsible for what they've done." "We are all responsible for what we create," the apparition said. "As you will be." "What do you mean?" The light within the crystal flared. "Your kind carries the same spark, the hunger to shape, to conquer, to survive at any cost. It is what makes you human, and what will destroy you if left unchecked." Darren tightened her grip on her rifle. "We didn't ask for your judgment." The figure smiled faintly. "And yet you seek meaning in every ruin. You cannot help it. That is why you endure when others fall." Fenric whispered, "What do you want from us?" "Nothing," the figure said, "but I can offer you a choice." The crystal brightened, and the chamber filled with shimmering images, stars, galaxies, burning worlds. "Within this vault lies a map, Paths to forgotten worlds, relics of knowledge your ancestors never reached. Take them, and your kind may rise again. Darren stared. And the cost? The figure's voice softened. To rise again, you must become what you fought against. You must build order from dominance, strength from submission. You must become the new architects. Raylan shook their head. No, we can be better than them. The apparition turned toward the child. Can you? Every creation believes itself better than its parent. Darren stepped between them. We'll take your map, she said, but we'll choose our own path. The figure regarded her silently, then inclined its head. So be it. The light within the crystal condensed into a single beam that shot outward, striking Fenric's data tablet. The screen flared with cascading coordinates, hundreds of star systems, each marked with alien script. When the light faded, the figure began to dissolve. Your kind may yet surprise us, it said, voice fading. Do not let your fire consume what it seeks to save. Then it was gone. The chamber fell silent. The humans stood motionless, their minds reeling. Fenric stared at the tablet. If this data is real, we have access to technology beyond anything we've known, enough to rebuild. Darren nodded slowly. Then we'll use it, carefully. Raylan looked up at her. You mean to leave Khelar? Yes, Darren said. Vale's fight bought us time, not safety. It's time to take that fire to the stars again. Over the next days, the survivors scavenged and repaired. Using the ancient mining equipment, they dug out a hangar buried beneath the rock. Inside, they discovered half a dozen shuttle frames, old, corroded, but repairable. Fenric led the effort, guided by the coordinates stored in the tablet. Raylan spent their hours assisting wherever possible, carrying cables, soldering wires, and watching the stars through cracks in the ceiling. One night, as Darren stood overlooking the hangar, the child approached her. Do you think the Vehlans are gone? Raylan asked. Darren shook her head. No, they'll return someday. Empires always do. But next time we'll be ready. Raylan looked up at her. You'll lead us, Darren smiled faintly. No, you will, the child frowned. I'm just one person. So was Vale, she said. So was I. One person is always where it starts. Weeks later, when the first shuttle roared to life, its engines casting pale blue light across the cavern, every survivor gathered to watch. The ship rose slowly, trembling, dust swirling around its hull. Darren watched from the platform above, her heart heavy and proud. Raylan stood in the cockpit window, small hands gripping the controls, eyes wide with determination. For the first time since the war began, the sound of engines did not mean destruction. It meant hope. The shuttle ascended through the shattered crust, emerging into the cold void above Khelar. The stars stretched endless before them, uncharted, waiting. And somewhere beyond those stars, the legacy of humanity burned brighter than ever. The shuttle Pioneer's flame drifted above the ruined moon, its engines humming softly as it entered orbit. The vast crater that had once been Khelar Station lay beneath it, a dark wound against the grey landscape. From this height, the destruction seemed almost serene, a scar frozen in time, marking the place where the last stand of humanity had burned itself into legend. Inside the cockpit, Raylan stared out at the emptiness. The stars filled the viewport in cold brilliance, sharp and indifferent. It was the first time Raylan had seen them without smoke or fire between. Colonel Darren stood beside the pilot's chair, her hands clasped behind her back. We are clear of the gravity well, she said, her voice steady but low. How are the systems holding? Fenric's voice crackled from the engineering console. Engines are stable, though the fuel cells are old. We'll need to find a resupply point soon or risk drifting. Darren nodded. Plot a course for the nearest habitable world from the data you extracted. Fenric's fingers flew over the console. According to the coordinates, there's a planet less than 4 days away, an old mining world listed as Archon 5. Abandoned centuries ago, but if the data is right, there's still a functioning orbital array there. Then that's our destination, Darren said. Raylan looked up from the viewport. What if someone's already there? Then we find out whether they're friend or foe, Darren replied. Either way, we'll adapt. The first day in space was a blur of repairs and tension. The shuttle creaked like an old ship at sea, its hull protesting every change in thrust. The survivors moved through its narrow corridors, transforming the cold metal interior into something resembling a home. Fenric and the engineers worked tirelessly in the engine bay, coaxing life from systems that should have died centuries earlier. The miners repurposed spare panels and pipes into makeshift living quarters. The medics tended to those still recovering from wounds sustained during the siege, and through it all, Raylan watched. The child had grown quieter since the discovery of the vault. They listened as the adults spoke in hushed tones about the coordinates, the potential technologies hidden among the stars, and the warning of the architect's ghost. Every discussion seemed to circle back to the same point. What would humanity become now that it had inherited the fire of its enemies? Late on the second night, Raylan found Darren alone in the observation chamber. She stood by the viewport, staring out at the endless void. "You do not sleep much," Raylan said. Darren turned, a faint smile ghosting across her face. "Neither do you." "I keep dreaming of the vault," Raylan said. "Of that voice, it said we might destroy ourselves." Darren's gaze softened. "Every species that rises must face that choice. The Vehlans failed theirs, we have not yet faced ours." Raylan hesitated. "And if we fail too, then another will rise," Darren said quietly, "but not before we burn bright enough to be remembered." The silence stretched. The stars beyond the glass seemed to pulse in time with their thoughts. Raylan finally asked, "Do you ever wonder if the Vehlans thought they were saving us?" Darren's expression darkened. "They called it salvation, order through submission, but they forgot that freedom is what gives order meaning. Without choice, existence becomes machinery." Raylan nodded slowly, though the weight of the words was heavy. "Then we must never become like them." Darren looked back to the stars. "Hold on to that. When I am gone, that belief must remain." By the third day, the Pioneer's flame reached the edge of the Arkan system. The planet loomed ahead, a vast sphere of ochre deserts and pale oceans, ringed by broken satellites. Fenric studied the readings. "Atmosphere's thin but breathable with filters. Radiation levels minimal. There's a signal coming from the northern hemisphere, an automated beacon still transmitting after all this time." "Can you identify it?" Darren asked. "It's human," Fenric said, "pre-war frequency, but there's something strange. The signal has been modified, layered with additional code. Could be a trap." "Or a message," Darren said. "Set course for the source." The shuttle descended through the upper atmosphere, shaking as it passed through layers of thin cloud. Lightning flickered below, illuminating the ruins of vast industrial complexes scattered across the surface. Massive towers jutted from the sand, rusted skeletons of a civilization that had once thrived. They landed near a half-buried facility, its entrance marked by the faint glow of the beacon. The survivors disembarked cautiously, weapons ready. The air was dry and carried a faint metallic tang. "Spread out," Darren ordered. "Stay in pairs." Raylan followed close behind her, rifle clutched tightly. Every shadow seemed alive. The facility's interior was coated in dust. Old banners hung from the ceiling, their colors faded beyond recognition. Control panels flickered weakly, still powered by ancient generators that hummed beneath the floor. Fenric knelt by one of the terminals. "This place was a manufacturing hub," he said. "But look at this. These systems were upgraded recently. Someone has been here." Darren frowned. "How recently?" "Months, maybe less," Fenric said. "Whoever it was, they had advanced tech, beyond our capacity." Raylan's voice was barely a whisper. "The Vehlans." Before Darren could answer, a voice echoed through the hall. "You are not Vehlan." The humans spun toward the sound. At the far end of the chamber, a figure stepped from the shadows, tall, wrapped in a long coat of dark fabric, face concealed by a visor that shimmered faintly. Darren raised her weapon. "Identify yourself." The figure stopped several meters away, hands raised. "If I meant you harm, you would already be dead," it said calmly. "Not much of an answer," Darren replied. The stranger tilted their head. "You carry the spark, the same energy that destroyed Khelar." Darren's finger tightened on the trigger. "How do you know about that?" The stranger hesitated, then reached up and removed the visor. Beneath it was a human face, gaunt, weathered, but unmistakably human. "My name is Keen," he said. "I am what remains of the Arkan colonists." The revelation hit the group like a silent detonation. "You're human?" Fenric asked. Keen nodded. "Was once, now something more or less, depending on perspective." Darren lowered her weapon slightly. "Explain." Keen gestured toward the glowing panels along the wall. When the Vehlans began their conquest, Arkan was abandoned, but not before its scientists began experiments with synthetic evolution, merging human biology with adaptive machine systems. They hoped to create a version of humanity that could survive anywhere, even under Vehlan rule. Raylan's eyes widened. "You merged with machines?" Keen's expression was unreadable. "We became part of the world we built. Some of us lived centuries through renewal cycles. Most lost themselves along the way." Fenric looked around uneasily. "And the others?" "Gone," Keen said. "Their minds burned out, their bodies reclaimed by the desert. I remained to keep the archives alive." Darren studied him carefully. "And the beacon?" "A lure," Keen admitted. "I was searching for survivors from the old colonies. The signal you followed was a test to see if humanity's flame still burned." Darren crossed her arms. "You found us." Keen nodded. "And you found something as well. The coordinates you carry, those were never meant for Vehlan hands." Fenric's eyes widened. "You know about the Architect's Vault?" Keen smiled faintly. "The Architects seeded this galaxy long before humanity rose from its cradle. Every species they touched inherited fragments of their design. The Vehlans were their chosen heirs. You were their contingency." Raylan frowned. "Contingency?" Keen met the child's gaze. "If the Vehlans failed, the architects believed another race might rise to balance the scales. Humanity was that race, born chaotic, unpredictable, adaptable. You were meant to succeed where they fell." Darren's voice was sharp. "We were never meant to serve anyone's design." Keen inclined his head. "Then prove it. The coordinates you possess lead not only to power, but to truth. There is a world among them, Khelar Prime. It was the final sanctuary of the architects. Whatever remains of their knowledge is there." Fenric frowned. "And why tell us this?" Keen turned toward a dark corridor. "Because the Vehlans know as well. Their ships are already on the move. If you seek to rebuild humanity, you must reach Khelar first." Hours later, as the Pioneer's flame lifted from Arkan's surface, Keen stood at the viewport beside Darren. "You're coming with us then?" she said. Keen nodded. "There is nowhere left for me here, and you'll need someone who understands what waits beyond those coordinates." Darren studied him for a moment. "If you betray us, I'll end you." Keen's smile was tired. "You sound like someone who still believes in mercy. I envy that." The journey to Khelar Prime took 6 days through the cold dark. During that time, Keen spoke little of his past, but his presence altered the mood aboard the shuttle. The survivors began to talk again, to laugh in small, uncertain ways. Raylan followed Keen often, asking endless questions about the old colonies and the machines that could think. Keen answered with patience, though his eyes often lingered on the child with a strange melancholy. On the 5th day, as the shuttle drifted through a nebula of violet gas, the sensors flared with warning. Fenric's voice came through the comm. "Multiple contacts, Vehlan signatures." "They've found us." Darren lunged to the controls. "Evasive maneuvers, divert all power to shields." Outside, 3 Vehlan interceptors burst from the nebula, their hulls gleaming like shards of obsidian. They moved with impossible grace, energy lances slicing through space. The Pioneer's flame shuddered as one beam grazed its flank, sending sparks cascading through the cabin. "Return fire," Darren shouted. Fenric triggered the railguns. Slugs of compressed tungsten streaked through space, one striking a Vehlan ship squarely and punching through its core. The alien craft erupted in a flare of light. The remaining 2 broke formation, circling like predators. Keen stepped to the weapon's console. "They're anticipating your patterns. You must think irregularly, humanly." He tapped a sequence across the controls, rerouting power through non-standard conduits. The shuttle spun sharply, skimming the edge of the nebula. The sudden move threw the Vehlans off balance, one colliding with a fragment of debris. Darren seized the moment. Now, the final railgun salvo tore through the last interceptor. The explosion illuminated the void in white light. When silence returned, the survivors exhaled as one. Fenric slumped against his seat. "We can't keep this up. Every time we fight, we lose something." Darren's gaze hardened. "Then we'll make every loss matter." On the sixth day, Khelar Prime came into view, a massive world of deep blue oceans and shining white continents. It looked untouched by war, a paradise preserved by distance and secrecy. Keen stared at it in silence. "The birthplace of the architect's final design," he said softly, "and perhaps the birthplace of yours." They descended through the clouds and landed on a plateau overlooking an endless sea. Strange, metallic spires rose from the landscape, glimmering with faint energy. The group disembarked, awestruck. The air was warm, rich with the scent of alien flora. "This place is alive," Fenric whispered. Raylan stepped forward, eyes wide. "It feels awake." Keen nodded. "The architects built their worlds to think. Every mountain, every current, part of a vast mind. Listen closely enough and it will answer." Darren frowned. "Answer how?" Before Keen could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. Light rippled across the spires, converging toward a single monolith at the center of the plateau. The structure split open, revealing a sphere of pure energy suspended within. A voice echoed through the air, neither male nor female, vast and resonant. "Children of fire, you have come at last." The humans froze. Keen stepped forward slowly. "We seek understanding. The Vehlans betrayed your purpose." "Humanity would do better." The light pulsed. "Would you? You bear the same spark. You build empires and call them salvation. You destroy and call it survival. Why should we trust you?" Darren raised her head. "Because we know what it costs. We watched our worlds burn. We watched our heroes die. We will not forget." The light seemed to regard her in silence. "And yet you carry violence in your hearts." "Because we must," Darren said. "Because without the will to fight, we would have vanished. But we fight to live, not to rule." For a long moment, there was no reply. Then the light dimmed, as if considering. At last, it spoke again. "Then take what remains of our legacy, shape it as you will. But remember this, creation without compassion is conquest, and conquest without memory is extinction." The energy sphere dissolved, leaving behind a crystalline structure embedded in the ground. Fenric approached it carefully. "Its data, a living archive." Keen exhaled slowly. "Then it is done. Humanity has inherited the architect's fire." Darren looked at him. "And what now?" Keen's eyes drifted toward the horizon. "Now you decide whether to use it or to become what you destroyed." That night, as the twin moons of Khelar rose, the survivors made camp near the monolith. The air was quiet, the stars brighter than they had ever seemed. Raylan sat beside Darren, staring at the glowing crystal. "Do you think we'll do better?" the child asked softly. Darren looked up at the sky. "I think we'll try, and that's what makes us human." The wind carried the sound of the ocean below, steady and eternal. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, the Vehlans still ruled worlds, unaware that the fire they had tried to extinguish now burned brighter than ever. And for the first time in generations, humanity looked not to survive, but to begin again. The light of Khelar's twin moons bled through the clouds, silver and pale blue, casting strange shadows across the camp. The crystalline monolith still pulsed faintly, as if breathing in rhythm with the planet itself. The survivors had grown quiet since the architect's voice faded. Even the wind seemed to move softly among the spires, reluctant to disturb the fragile stillness. Colonel Rynard Vale, her armor scoured and her weapon laid aside for the first time in months, stood at the edge of the plateau, watching the sea. The water shimmered with threads of phosphorescent light, alive with bioluminescent organisms that formed patterns like constellations. She wondered if the architects had shaped them deliberately, or if even they had left something to chance. Behind her, Raylan approached. The child carried a small bundle of equipment scavenged from the shuttle, eyes bright with purpose. "I've been studying the archive," Raylan said. "It isn't just a repository of data, it's responsive. It changes when I think about it." Darren turned slightly. How do you mean? It reads intent, Raylan said. When I imagine a question, it shows me symbols. They rearrange themselves like they're alive. Show me. They walked back to the heart of the camp, where Fenric and several engineers were monitoring the monolith with scanning tools. The crystal emitted a low hum as they approached, shifting colors from deep violet to soft gold. Raylan knelt beside it, placing a hand on the surface. The glow intensified, and streams of light rose into the air, forming intricate geometric shapes. Fenric stepped back in awe. It's reacting to neural signals, directly. Darren frowned. Is it safe? Raylan nodded absently, eyes unfocused as they stared into the shifting symbols. It's showing me something, maps, equations, structures. Keen approached from the shadows, his expression grave. It's testing you, he said quietly. The architects designed their archives to bond only with those they deemed worthy of inheritance. Darren's hand went instinctively to her weapon. You mean it could reject us? Keen's gaze lingered on Raylan. It could do more than that. Before Darren could respond, the air shimmered. The patterns of light twisted into a spiral, expanding outward until a holographic image filled the space above the camp. It depicted a vast galactic map, systems marked in crimson and white, connected by glowing lines. Fenric's eyes widened. That's the old Vehlan expansion grid, and there, those white stars must be the lost human colonies. Keen nodded slowly. The architects tracked both species. They anticipated conflict even before the first meeting. Raylan reached toward one of the white stars. The map zoomed in, revealing a world orbiting a dying sun. This planet, the child said softly, it's marked with both Vehlan and human symbols. Keen stiffened. That is Urith, the last shared outpost before the wars began. Darren studied the image. If this archive contains architect technology, Urith might have remnants too. Fenric shook his head. That world was consumed in the first purge. Nothing could have survived. Perhaps, Darren said, but the map wouldn't show it if it were dead. Raylan looked up. Maybe the architects want us to go there. Keen's tone was careful, or perhaps they want to see if you will. By dawn, the decision was made. They would leave Khelar Prime and set course for Urith. The survivors worked in silence, packing supplies, recalibrating the shuttle, and storing fragments of the archive's data in portable cores. The crystalline monolith had dimmed again, as though resting after its exertion. When they prepared to lift off, Raylan lingered by the monolith one last time. Will it remember us? They asked softly. Keen stood nearby, watching. If the architects built it well, it already does. Raylan placed a hand against the smooth surface. The crystal pulsed once, faintly, as though acknowledging the farewell. Moments later, the pioneer's flame rose through the morning mist and vanished into the sky. The voyage to Urith took them beyond the safe routes marked by the old star charts. The darkness between systems grew thicker, tinged with strange electromagnetic interference. On the second day, the sensors began to pick up faint transmissions, distorted fragments of music, speech, and static. Fenric frowned at the readings. Their old signals, pre-war broadcasts bouncing through the void. Or echoes, Keen said, the remnants of machines still running long after their creators are gone. Darren studied the stars ahead, ghosts of ourselves. The child sat near the viewport, gazing out into the endless dark. Do you think the architects ever watched us like this, wondering what we would become? Keen gave a small, thoughtful smile. I think they feared you. You were unpredictable. Too wild to control, too clever to contain. Raylan looked up at him. And what do you think we are now? Becoming, Keen said simply. On the fifth day, Urith came into view. The planet was a half-lit sphere, its surface scarred by ancient bombardment. Massive cracks ran across its continents, glowing faintly with molten rivers beneath. Yet above the devastation, there remained signs of structure, towers and domes half buried in ash, still emitting faint energy signatures. Fenric stared at the readings. Those structures are active, impossible after this long. Nothing is impossible anymore, Darren said quietly. Bring us down. The shuttle descended through layers of dust and cloud. The sky was tinged red, as if perpetually on the edge of sunset. They landed near the ruins of a vast city, its towers leaning like broken teeth against the horizon. The air was heavy, metallic, and carried the faint smell of ozone. As they disembarked, static crackled across their helmets. Keen's posture stiffened. "We are not alone here." Darren raised her rifle. "Vehlan's?" "Not exactly," Keen said. "Something older." They advanced cautiously through the ruins. Strange symbols were etched into the walls, spirals within spirals, glowing faintly in the dim light. The deeper they went, the more the city seemed alive, humming beneath the surface. Raylan touched one of the symbols. The glow brightened under their hand. "It feels aware." Keen nodded grimly. The architects experimented with living structures. The Vehlans copied them here. When the war came, they couldn't control what they built. Fenric looked around uneasily. "Then what's still powering it?" A voice answered from the shadows. "We are." The humans turned as one. Figures emerged from the darkness, tall, slender, draped in tattered armor that once bore Vehlan insignia. But their eyes glowed with shifting colors, their movements disjointed, as though guided by another will. Keen's expression hardened. "Hybrid remnants." The nearest figure spoke again, voice layered with both human and alien tones. "We were left behind, flesh and machine, bound to the code of the architects, neither one thing nor another." Darren raised her rifle. "Are you hostile?" The figure tilted its head. "Are you alive?" The question hung in the air. Raylan stepped forward cautiously. "We came to learn what remains, to understand." The figure studied the child for a long moment, then it nodded. "Follow." They were led through the ruins to a vast chamber beneath the surface. At its center stood a crystalline core, larger than any they had seen, its light pulsing slowly. Around it, hybrid beings tended to consoles and conduits, maintaining systems that had outlived empires. The leader turned to them. "This is what remains of Urith, the convergence. We maintain the last architect construct in this region of space." Keen approached the core, eyes narrowing. "This energy pattern, it's different, self-modifying." The leader nodded. "It evolves, as do we." Darren frowned. "You mean it's alive?" "Yes," the hybrid said. "It has waited for a purpose. Perhaps you are that purpose." Raylan stepped closer, entranced by the light. "It knows we are here." The core pulsed brighter, and a whisper filled their minds, not in words, but in sensations. Memories of stars being born, worlds shaped, civilizations rising and falling. The weight of history pressed against them, immense and terrible. Keen gritted his teeth. "It's communicating through direct neural resonance, too powerful." Darren pulled Raylan back, but the child resisted, eyes wide and glowing faintly with reflected light. "It's showing me what the architects feared. They created the Vehlans to bring order, but the Vehlans destroyed freedom. They created humanity to bring balance, but we destroyed ourselves." The light flared, and the voice returned, clear this time, resonating through every nerve. "Children of chaos and flame, the cycle must end." The hybrids bowed their heads as if in prayer. Keen shouted over the rising hum. "It's awakening fully. The construct will not contain itself much longer." Darren turned to the hybrids. "Shut it down." "We cannot," their leader said. "It chooses its own path." The core's light surged to blinding brilliance. Raylan cried out, clutching their head, and then darkness. When Darren's vision cleared, she found herself lying amid the ruins. The air was still, and the great core had gone dark. Around her, the hybrids lay motionless. Fenric groaned nearby, dragging himself upright. "What happened?" Keen's voice came from the shadows, rough and weak. "It reached into our minds, took something, left something else." Raylan stood in the center of the chamber, unharmed but changed. Their eyes glowed faintly, like the fading light of the core. "Raylan," Darren said cautiously. The child turned, voice distant. "It showed me everything. The architects, the Vehlans, us. The pattern always ends the same. Creation devours itself. They want us to break it." Fenric stared. "How?" "By choosing," Raylan said simply. "By refusing to become what they expect." Keen approached slowly. "And what did it give you?" Raylan looked up, and for an instant their voice was layered, human and something else. "A key to the final architect network, the place where the first designs were written. Darren's blood ran cold. Where? Raylan's gaze shifted toward the sky, at the heart of the Vehlan homeworld. Back aboard the Pioneer's flame, the survivors sat in stunned silence. Outside, Urith burned faintly beneath them, its dying glow reflected on their faces. Darren finally spoke. If this is true, then our war has never been about survival. It's been about inheritance. Keen nodded grimly. And now you have the chance to claim it. Fenric's hands trembled over the controls. You're suggesting we go to the Vehlan core? That's suicide. Perhaps, Darren said. But if the Architect's final network lies there, it could reshape everything. The Vehlans would no longer be gods, neither would we. Raylan met her gaze. Then we go, we end the cycle. The Colonel nodded slowly, resolve hardening in her eyes. Set the course. Outside, the stars turned slowly, as though watching. The engines flared, and the Pioneer's flame vanished into the darkness, toward the place where it had all begun. And in the silent ruins of Urith, the extinguished core flickered once, as if smiling. The Pioneer's flame slipped from the dark between stars and emerged at the edge of Vehlan space. Ahead of it loomed a vast crimson nebula, a roiling storm of ionized gas and magnetic turbulence. Within that swirling light hung the Vehlan homeworld, a massive world wreathed in rings of steel and shadow, surrounded by fleets that gleamed like daggers. It was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. The heart of a civilization that had once ruled 1,000 worlds, now fading but still proud. Colonel Darren Vale stood on the command deck, staring through the viewport. Her reflection was ghostly in the red light. That's where it began, she murmured, and where it ends. Fenric adjusted the scanners. Their orbital grid is still active. Thousands of defense platforms. Any approach will trigger automatic fire. Keen studied the readings. They will not recognize us as human. To them, we are prey returning to the mouth of the predator. Raylan stood beside the forward console, silent. The faint glow in their eyes had grown dimmer since Urith, as if whatever energy had touched them now rested deeper within. We cannot fight our way in, Fenric said. We'd be dust before we reached the surface. Darren nodded. Then we won't fight. We'll pass through their defenses the same way they built them, using their own design. Keen turned to her slowly. You intend to use the Architect key. Darren met his gaze. It's what Raylan carries now. Whatever that construct gave them, it's the only way to reach the core without being obliterated. Keen hesitated. You understand what you're asking of the child. Raylan's voice was calm. I understand better than anyone. It chose me. Now it's my turn to choose. Darren placed a hand on their shoulder. Then we move. The shuttle drifted into the nebula, its hull glimmering faintly as electromagnetic currents washed over it. The air inside the cabin trembled with static. Fenric's voice came through the comm. Shields at 60%. The radiation will melt us if we stay too long. Raylan knelt by the control node, eyes closed, hands pressed to the metal surface. I can feel it, they whispered. The network threads through this entire system, energy, data, memory, all woven into one structure. The Vehlans don't even understand it anymore. Keen's tone was low. They worship what they cannot master. Raylan's fingers traced patterns across the console. Symbols flared to life, lines of light racing through the ship. The sensors crackled, then went silent. Fenric glanced at the readings. Their targeting systems just ignored us. Darren leaned forward. Keep us on course, straight to the surface. The shuttle slipped past orbital rings and defense grids without resistance, ghosting through the Vehlan perimeter like a shadow. Massive cities glimmered below, vast geometric patterns spreading across continents. From orbit, they looked flawless, like circuits etched into the planet's crust. This entire world is a machine, Fenric breathed, a living construct. Keen nodded grimly. The Vehlans believed themselves gods because they stood on the bones of gods. The ship broke through the cloud layer and descended toward a central spire that rose from the planet's equator, a tower that pierced the sky and reached into orbit. The core, Raylan said softly, that's where the first Architect network still sleeps. They landed on a platform near the spire's base. The structure stretched upward beyond sight, forged of black alloy and shimmering light. The air hummed with power. Darren stepped onto the platform, weapon ready. "No welcoming party," she said. Keen scanned the area. "No need, this entire place is aware of us." As if to confirm his words, the ground beneath them rippled with energy. Shapes formed from the air, tall figures of light and metal, their faces sculpted in the likeness of the Vehlans, but empty of emotion. Sentinels of the core. Raylan stepped forward. "We seek entry." The nearest sentinel tilted its head. Its voice was like static shaped into words. "You bear the key, but the key is bound to judgment. Speak your purpose." Darren raised her chin. "To end the cycle of domination, to return freedom to all who were bound by this legacy." The sentinel regarded her for a moment, then looked to Raylan. "Do you share this purpose?" Raylan's voice was quiet yet steady. "I do." The sentinels dissolved into mist. A section of the tower opened, revealing a passage of pure light leading inward. Keen exhaled. Then the heart awaits. The interior of the spire defied comprehension. Vast corridors curved upon themselves, dimensions shifting with every step. Streams of light flowed through transparent walls like rivers of thought. Raylan led the way, guided by instinct more than sight. The deeper they went, the stronger the hum became, until it was not just sound, but sensation, vibrating through every cell. They emerged into a chamber so large it seemed to contain its own horizon. At its center floated a sphere of light similar to the one on Khelar, but far greater, an ocean of pure consciousness suspended in midair. "This is it," Keen whispered. "The first network, the architect heart." The light pulsed, and a voice filled the chamber, not from any direction, but from within their minds. "You have come bearing the fire we left behind. The cycle nears its end." Raylan stepped forward. "You created the Vehlans to bring order. You created us to bring balance. Both failed. Why?" The voice rippled like distant thunder. "Because we did not understand the one truth that defines creation, that order and chaos are not opposites, but partners. We tried to shape life into perfection, and perfection devoured itself." Keen frowned. "Then why call us here? To decide whether the pattern continues," the voice said. "The network endures because it fears oblivion. The Vehlans maintain it through control. But control is stagnation. If you wish to end the cycle, you must destroy this heart, and with it, every remnant of architect influence. You will erase our works forever." Fenric stared in disbelief. "You want us to kill you? We ask nothing," the voice said. "We offer choice." The chamber trembled. Images flooded the air, galaxies collapsing, civilizations rising from dust, humanity rebuilding from ashes, Vehlans kneeling before their machines. Darren turned to Raylan. "If we destroy it, everything they built, Vehlan power, architect design, all of it ends. But so does the knowledge we could use to rebuild." Raylan's voice trembled. "If we keep it, we risk becoming them." Keen stepped closer to the core, eyes full of conflict. "I was born from their experiments. My existence came from their arrogance. And yet I have seen what humans can create without them: hope, defiance, wonder. If you must choose, child, choose for the living, not the dead." Raylan looked at Darren. "What would you do?" Darren met their gaze steadily. "When I was young, I believed victory was survival. Then I saw what survival without freedom becomes. Whatever we do here must give us the right to make our own mistakes." Raylan closed their eyes. "Then we end the cycle." The child stepped into the light. The core flared, reacting to their presence. Symbols spiraled across the walls, fractal patterns spinning faster and faster. The voice thundered in their minds. "If you do this, you will be alone. The fire will burn without guidance." Raylan's reply was calm. "That's what makes it human." A beam of white energy burst from the floor, connecting Raylan to the heart. The entire spire shuddered. Lightning-like tendrils of data raced through the structure, unraveling millennia of code. Fenric grabbed Darren's arm. "The network's collapsing, we have to move." Darren shouted over the roar. "Raylan." The child stood in the storm of light, arms outstretched, their form blurring. "Go, I'll finish it." Keen's voice was rough with emotion. "You cannot hold that alone." Raylan turned toward them, smiling faintly through the glare. Maybe not, but humanity will. The chamber erupted in brilliance. The floor buckled. Darren dragged Fenric and Keen toward the exit as the walls split apart, pouring light into the sky. They barely reached the shuttle before the tower exploded in a column of fire and energy that pierced the heavens. The Pioneer's flame lifted from the surface, engines screaming. Below them, the Vehlan world convulsed. The planetary rings shattered, fragments scattering like burning glass. Then silence. The light faded. The red nebula dimmed. When the sensors cleared, the entire defense network had gone dark. The Vehlan fleet drifted without power, their engines dead. Fenric stared at the readings. It's gone. The architect network is gone, every trace of it. Keen sat in silence, eyes fixed on the dying world. The gods are dead, truly this time. Darren closed her eyes. And the child? No one answered. Days later, the Pioneer's flame emerged from hyperspace near a quiet yellow star. The surviving crew gathered in the observation bay, watching a green-blue world spin below. Fenric spoke softly. Uninhabited, breathable atmosphere, oceans rich in oxygen and metals, we could build here. Darren nodded slowly. Then that is what we'll do. Keen turned to her. You would start again so soon after ending a universe's inheritance? Darren's eyes were tired but fierce. That's what we do. We fall, we rise, we build again. He smiled faintly. Then perhaps the architects were right to fear you. They descended through the atmosphere. Clouds parted to reveal vast plains and mountains untouched by civilization. The shuttle set down in a valley beside a river of clear water. As the hatch opened, the scent of new air filled their lungs. Darren stepped onto the soil and looked toward the sky. Above them, no fleet moved, no gods watched. Only stars, cold, distant, and waiting. Fenric began unpacking supplies. Keen walked to the edge of the river, staring at his reflection as if searching for what remained of himself. Darren gazed upward. Somewhere beyond those stars, perhaps Raylan's spark still burned, woven into the fabric of what had once been divine. She whispered to the wind, "You were right, child. The fire is ours now." Years passed. The colony grew, tents became shelters, shelters became cities. The survivors taught their children the old names and the stories of what had been. They built machines, but never worshipped them. They reached for the stars, but never forgot the ground beneath their feet. One evening, under the glow of a new moon, Darren walked alone to the riverbank. The water shimmered faintly, as though reflecting another light. And there, for an instant, she heard a voice carried by the current, soft, familiar, and filled with quiet wonder. "The cycle is broken, now write your own." She smiled, and the stars above seemed to burn a little brighter. Humanity had not won through conquest, nor through power. It had endured through choice, through the stubborn, fragile belief that even in the ruins of gods, fire could still be born. And under those cold stars, a new world began to dream.